Right, I'm now on. Way, great start. So thank you very much for coming. So I've just had an amazing day here. It's like a shopaholics future world. We've discovered all sorts of things that have been utterly incredible. But today I'm going to talk to you about irrational shopping and what makes us buy the things that we do. Now I need a quick show of hands to whether any of you think you're an irrational shopper or not. All of you, excellent, so that's good. So I'm going to give you a little comfort today that actually you're not totally irrational. It's other things at play. So I really have spent the day looking and building a kind of metaphorical shopping list for my home. I've discovered massive stags that I just can't live without, and there's a unicorn shell that I can't live without. But how am I actually going to make the decision to what products make it to my home? And I'm probably going to let my subconscious do all the work for me, because 95% of our decisions operate in that way. And it's that glorious, complex subject of decision making that I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon. So I thought I'd share with you some of my more irrational moments of shopping this year. And I'll start with the first one. I spent the first 6 months of this year working out which car to buy. I was totally and utterly convinced I was going to buy a little i3. I was going to save the environment and I was going to save my own economy. And for reasons that I can't quite remember, because mostly I put my fingers in my ears when I think about it, I test drove a little red car and the very next day I bought it, despite all the research I've done. Then there's all the months and years that I bought Heinz baked beans without giving it a second thought. And another quick show of hands. How many of you shopped in Aldi for the last 2 years? Everybody shopped in Aldi? Excellent, thanks from the back there. Well, what did Aldi do to change our behaviour? And why have we suddenly added them to our shopping repertoire? Then there's why are we enticed by buy now, pay later deals in places like DFS? Or equally, why have I got pots and pots and pots of eye cream when actually if you look at me I've still got a fair old whack of wrinkles, and that's because I'm influenced by India Night in the Style magazine every week. And finally, what is wrong with me? Why do I go to IKEA and buy yet another Billy bookcase, and then I've got to make something with 1,000 parts that don't make any sense to me whatsoever? Well, all will be revealed. So fortunately, as I guess as a business or a business owner, I'm actually not that irrational or not that mad all of the time. And so what we're doing is looking at the science behind some of those decisions. We start by thinking about what the traditional economists think about this, and this is all about rational decisions. They say we make things in a considered way, making considered choices. Well, that's not actually the case, because we're all people and we're all humans. And that means we make mistakes all of the time. There are compulsions and our habits that drive us, and we make the mistakes. If I take my Heinz beans one, why am I buying that week in, week out? I've no idea. And actually, it's the pesky biases that we have, the prejudices and the preferences that really drive us to make those decisions. And it's the whole subject of biases that I'm going to talk around today, because they stem from the School of Behavioural Economics, and that's what I want to spend some time talking about. Fairly light-hearted, given that it's the last session of the day, so I won't spend too long talking about it. But I love a good definition, and I particularly like this one on behavioural economics. It's the marriage of psychology and social psychology that we're really interested in with actual the economics of making decisions. And it provides valuable insights, and that's what I need as a business, into what makes individuals behave and make decisions that are not necessarily in their own best interests. Now, I'm a marketeer, not a psychologist, so this subject is absolutely enormous and huge. So what we focus on in a business is how do we apply behavioural economics principles and practices onto brand communication and brand experiences, which is what we specialise in. So for our clients like Sharp's Bedrooms and Silent Night that operate in kind of this home world, or equally as far as Nike, what we're doing is helping them influence their shoppers using brand and retail strategies that are really making a big impact on those businesses. Now, the big problem with behavioural economics is that there are literally hundreds of the pesky things, hundreds of biases, nudges and heuristics. And in fact, there's over 173 and last counting, but because the subject is moving and evolving all of the time at the moment, it's just growing. So it actually makes it really, really difficult for you to apply to a business. So what we chose to do is take all of those biases and condense them into 7 core behaviours that we believe drive shopper behaviour. And you'll recognise some of these as I walk through it, particularly in relation to my behaviour. So if I start with, it's got to be my top right, you'll have to convert it, what I know and always buy. Those are the habit biases. So those are the things around loss aversion and around status quo. So that's where we buy things habitually. So that's my Heinz beans example. Then there are the emotive biases, so buying with my heart and not my head. So that's all around temptation and priming and bizarreness. And obviously that's where my little red sports car came into the mix. Then there's brands and people that behave by just choosing the simplest options. That's things like chunking, splitting things into 1, 2, 3s and mental accounting. And then there's our ones that are around following herds and the social norms, so buying what my crowd buys. And if you think about Whiskers, they've been in this territory for years, so behavioural economics is not that new with their 9 out of 10 cats campaign. That's just fundamentally an influencer campaign. Then we have the ones that are, I guess, in the demise of financial services with what will gratify me now. So those are all the things around putting things off for tomorrow. So it's all the world of pension. But actually, if we reflect it back into our world, it's things like the DFS, buy now, pay later scheme. So we get our sofa today and we'll have to worry about the payment of it in a few years. And then there's the contextual ones, and that really does operate in your world. So those are things like value perception, exclusivity and scarcity. And it's why sale is so important in your sector, driving demand. And then finally, there's the commitment ones. So those are things like social incentive and commitment pledge. And in fact, IKEA are so brilliant at this, they've actually got, oh my goodness me, it's dropping all the way down my dress. We might need to stop. Yes. Uncomfortable experience. So yes, so the IKEA one, and IKEA, I guess, are so fabulous at what they do that they've now got their own bias, and it is called the IKEA effect, and that's where people place a disproportionately high value on the products that they partially created. So the more that we get involved with products, the more that we are engaged with that brand. So I know there are some cynics in the room. I was definitely one of them. So what I wanted to show you is a little film that perhaps will persuade you that we can influence behaviour.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These
Bit
folks
quiet.
are entering, a man with a white shirt, the lady with a trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before. fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door, everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
It's brilliant. So I think that definitely convinced me that there was something in behavioural economics, and clearly it has been around for decades and used primarily in the public sector, but now we're seeing more and more examples of it in the commercial sector. And that's really what I wanted to share with you today. We have 3 trends that we'll talk about. They're entitled, It's All About Me. Now, behavioural economics is all about observation, and there's nothing that we like doing more at the Market Creative than watching shoppers. And what we've observed is almost that inclusivity that shoppers are using now, and wanting to create brands that are actually just about me, the me inside. So we'll look for brands that share some of the same values. So for each of the 3 trends, I'll just share the trend, I'll share some global examples of it, I'll share the bias behind it, the behavioural bias behind it, and then I'll give you some practical tips to how you can apply them to your business. So the first one is Stand By Me, and really this is about purpose. Consumers are nowadays wanting brands that give them something more than a great offer or a great product. They're really looking for people to come behind a cause or go behind a cause that they can tackle. So if I take this again at a very personal level, I just mentioned that Silent Night were one of our brands. They're an amazing bed brand, but I didn't really connect with them until they stood for one of the causes that I was interested in, and that's plastics, and actually more importantly, that's plastics' effect on the ocean. Now, Silent Night are a brilliant brand, but I don't actually have one, so don't tell anybody, and if anybody's from Silent Night here, honestly, I will buy one at one point. But now you've given me a reason, Silent Night, to do so. So they launched at the beginning of this year a range of mattresses that were made from recycled plastic bottles. And they also partnered with the Marine Conservation Society. So now I feel that Silent Night, above and beyond the amazing products and all the trust that goes with it, actually can stand by me against some of the causes that I've got. So in buying a bed, I'm actually able to give back. So as consumers, we're very much looking for brands that mirror our own values or values that we aspire to. So we're much more cautious and conscious of the brands that we work with. Now this isn't just CSR anymore, this isn't just planting trees or helping in orphanages, but if you're doing that, please carry on. This is big real world issues. Now traditionally brands have really shied away from that. It could be a reputational nightmare, but now we're seeing brands standing for some of the things as an economy and as a global economy we're really interested in. And the first brand that I want to share with you is Smirnoff. Now, I won't pretend for 1 minute to know anything about electronic music, but I do know that they've got a real diversity issue. So Thump, who are the electronic music and cultural channel, found out that 17% of DJs on the music festival tour were women. So just 17%. So they had a real diversity issue. So what Smirnoff wanted to do was tackle that. So on International Women's Day, they launched the Equalising Music Initiative with a big ambition, and that was to double the number of women headliners by 2020. So they're doing that by mentoring women, they're doing that by promoting women, and using the leading influencers. And I just wanted to bring it back to purpose for a minute. And this is Sil Salah, Diageo's Chief Marketing Officer. And it's a really nice way of framing why this is so important, both to consumers and to and to the brand. So she said, we believe that our brands should have a purpose greater than just amazing drinks. And Smirnoff brand's purpose is to move the world to be inclusive. We believe we can make a difference by using our presence in electronic music culture to drive diversity within the community. And I don't think anybody, and particularly women, wouldn't connect more with a brand with that purpose that sits behind it. So in terms of the bias, I mentioned this earlier, it's actually one of my favourites. It's the commitment pledge. So the more public we make our stance, the less willing we are to change it. So by Smirnoff standing there with women, they're really tackling that issue. And again, if I bring it to a very personal level, and I think about some of the commitments I've made, I know that on the years that I sign up for the Manchester 10K, then I will run 10K. And the years that I don't, I'm afraid this is one of them, which is why I'm a bit lardy, I'm only up to 5K. So it's about making that real public stance. So in terms of how do you apply that thinking to your business, 3 tips. If you don't have a purpose, and I'm sure you really, really will do, then ask your staff. I can assure you that they will have one that they're really passionate about. And it's an amazing way of engaging your employees and getting them involved in your business. Once you've chosen what that purpose is, go after it with a single-minded pursuit. Don't waver and do different things. Just absolutely focus on that. And as a result of that, don't think about the numbers. Yes, you want return on investment, but this is much bigger than that. Just think about the greater good that your company is doing to the world. So that's that one. Then on to the next one, which is teach me. And this really does appeal to my belief about brands that should be living, breathing entities that give us great brand experience. And what better way than to experience a brand than training? So think about this as a way of growing your audience, or perhaps extending your audience, or even revitalizing a product that's in decline or a category that's in decline. And I think about some of the things we've seen here around crafting and baking. There's an enormous skills gap in that area. So how could you use training to engage those audiences? So if you're in retail, use training as a way to drive footfall. But equally, if you're a brand here, think about how you can work with those retail partners to drive that through. So again, using an example, there's some numbers that sit before this example just to give you some context to the scale of this issue. So this is around digital literacy. So what we found with the Good Things Foundation is that they reported that 90% of jobs require digital literacy in the UK now, which is a staggering number. And then we had 69% of companies saw that it was a real barrier to growth having this digital skill gap. And I know that as an employer in Manchester. And then coupled with the one which I actually found the most horrific, which is 50% of 18 to 25-year-olds leave education without skills. It's an enormous issue for our economy. Now, I guess really because it's so big, you can only expect that one of the big boys will tackle that. And that's exactly what Google have done with the Google Digital Garage. Now, they're in cities all over the UK. This is an example of one from Manchester. And they basically camp in the city centre and give free digital coaching. It could be to develop your CV. It could be to help you move from one job to another. Or equally, it could help you in starting your business. So try and root these out. They're really, really useful. And they come around in a big bus as well, so they're not just in the city centre. Now, again, you could be quite cynical about this. It's the big boys that play, but there are actually a number of biases that sit behind this. There's the power of free, and everything with it is free. There's reciprocity, which is a killer to say when you're speaking, but actually it's the most important one, I think, which is social incentive. And that's that social reward can be greater value than money. And if we think about Google and Google's reputation, that is actually at the heart of what this initiative is about. This is about building brand equity, which then has an immediate impact on the balance sheet. And I think that's what drives Google behind this. But it's not the preserve of the big boys from our perspective. This is about reaching out to local communities and local schools and seeing how you can help. So if you fancy doing that, 3 things to think about when we are developing teaching schemes. Firstly, know your skills and think about how you can deliver those in different channels. Can you do something in AI versus doing something in your store versus doing something online that's different, and apply those skills? Then we all love a gold star or a certificate or something that says we've done an amazing job. I used to walk around with hundreds of them, of my kids on them. So think about how you can build an accreditation scheme, but equally, if you can think about how you could build a CPD scheme around it. And finally, I guess the most important one for this, and I guess the most powerful, is if you can encourage your customers to train each other, you get 2 amazing things. You get power users who know your product inside and out and can share that knowledge with everybody else, but you also get power advocates, and they're the most incredibly valuable asset that you can have as a brand. On to the last one, last bit of fun today, and that's humour me. And this one is about laughter, and laughter really gives us kind of a lift. So if the day's been a bad day, so I had the usual start on the first day of term of no PE kit, which I've fallen over every day for the last 6 weeks, but this morning didn't exist, or we've got a tricky meeting, or we've got the impending doom of Brexit, actually laughter really lifts the day. So if you can harness that as a brand, it's incredibly powerful. And comedy never ever goes out of fashion in my world, which is advertising. It's just an absolute tricky thing to get hold of and really difficult to execute. But if you do it well, you'll get amazing results. But if you think about the type of content that you share socially, it'll either be because it's got a human connection, it's emotional, or because it's made you laugh out loud. And in fact, 50% of the content we share is in that genre. So as a brand, it's really, really important to think about how you could use humour to create shareable and memorable content. So I really struggled, I have to be honest, to think about which brand I would show, but this is the one.
I just want a coffee.
Can I have the Wi-Fi password, please?
Yeah, sure. It's fly high with your dreams.
That's £9.
What?
McCafe. Great tasting coffee.
There you go.
Simple.
Thanks.
So funny. So not only is it a really funny ad, but they have taken the absolute mickey out of the coffee industry. They did something incredibly clever at the end of that commercial. Don't know whether you clocked it, but they anchored the price of coffee at £9. So what they've actually done is created value for their own brand, and therefore the bias that sits behind it is quite an important one. It's not just humour, it's value perception. And that suggests that price dictates how you value something, even when applied to seemingly identical products. So that simple cup of coffee that you get for £1 at IKEA versus the £9. Really simple piece of advertising and gets the message across incredibly effectively. So last few tips for you guys. When you're thinking about humour, start with your customer's pain point. Generally, that's where most of the fun is, and really exaggerate something. If you can solve a problem with exaggeration, that's a great way of doing it. Or play the inventor, find an epic demonstration of that product. And I don't know whether any of you have seen the Blend Tech videos on Will It Blend. They're a great example. Have a look at that. And then finally, laugh at yourself. Self-deprecation, which I think I've had a bit of today with my dropping microphone, is a great way to show authenticity and confidence. And I don't know whether you'll remember the great chicken shortage earlier in the year. Well, there's one brand that did this really well, and that's Kentucky Fried Chicken. They really showed their fallibility as a brand, a real moment of genius that we really warmed to. And for those of you that are BE experts, and I know there'll be a few around the room, that's the pratfall effect. So that's where we warm to brands and people who make us laugh because they're a little bit more clumsy. So I wanted to leave you with one final thought. Behavioural economics is about making small change and small impacts, but for the greater good of humanity. And Richard Thaler is the god in this space. He won a Nobel Prize for this work in 2017. And what he said is, behavioural economics, behavioural science, and behavioural thinking and principles deliver outsized results for undersized investments. So for us, it's where the smart marketeers reside. It's very much about thinking about behaviour and action rather than the thoughts and feelings of your shoppers, which is why we are fast becoming one of the leading behavioural economics and behavioural marketing agencies in the UK. We're hugely, hugely curious about this area and want to know more about it and discover more examples of it. And we're also a super, super nice company. So I shared 3 trends with you today. There's 7 further in our top trends driving consumer behaviour report, which you're more than welcome to download. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much and thank you for your time. Okay.